So Matt, if we could start with you, how true a story was what we saw?
Oh, blimey. I should have said at the start, really, by way of introduction, before I got into all that ukuleleism, that, well, you see, the film is based on a book that I was given by my mum in the year 2000. So it is an adaptation of an existing text. And, well, that's a huge question, and I really don't know where to begin, but I think it's fair to say what I was, in terms of truth, I'm very interested in truth. I tried to get some essential spirit off the page and onto the screen, and for me, the spirit that I saw in the book is as much to do with the way it smelt and felt, the look of the font, his turns of phrase, why he would be using that particular kind of language, as anything in terms of narrative story line, if you see what I mean. So it's very flexible in terms of fact, as you can probably tell. But he doesn't, it's a weird book, it's full of facts, but none of them actually really add to the story in a way. It's like an itinerary more than a story or a narrative. So I've had to kind of find other ways to give that feel of narrative. Luckily it's a journey and he does go through different countries, so that helps. But there's no obvious emotional arc in the book, so I had to bring some of that in. And it's fair to say also there's truth in the work that I did with Sam and Sam's interpretation of the story, and also elements of my own personal life that I've brought in there. There's truth in those. And over 13 years, I think it's hard for those things not to kind of creep in and evolve, and hopefully if I've done my job right, they feel like a coherent truth. But goodness knows what the guy who wrote the book would make of it. I mean,
Sam, what did you take from the story? What did you feel that the experience was like for James in terms of how you interpreted it?
Well, I think two things. Firstly, when Matt gave me the book, and I started reading it, and I thought, he was very strongly Christian, James Duffy, and every day was very routine. He woke up in the morning, he packed up his tent, he had breakfast, he got on his bike, he stopped and had lunch, and every day seemed very much the same. It was very repetitive, and I thought, to be honest, I'm not interested in this at all. I think it's boring. However, Matt and I did kind of capture the spirit and the underlying humour, I think, of that repetitiveness and that routine and that sort of really Christian spirit that was in it. I think also, if you imagine now travelling, I would rely on the internet, I would rely a lot on technology, I would be booking things. If I was going travelling, I'd be arranging everything in advance. I would need all these things. I would have to use all these resources that are available to me. Back then in 1951, there was none of that. James Duffy's experience was completely different to what I would do now. He just decided to go off travelling. He didn't think about the barriers. He didn't let them get in the way. He just went off. And I couldn't imagine doing that now. That would be really difficult for me. So I think he's an amazing role model for deaf people now, because although nobody knows him, it would be great to show that, despite the fact that he didn't have all these things, the deaf community didn't have those opportunities afforded to them then. He just thought, I'm going travelling anyway, and I think that that's a really nice kind of role model to bring into a kind of typical audience today.
Thank you. There was a line in the film that really resonated for me, and I would be interested in both of your takes on it. And it was, I'm interested to know how you experience talking to your brain without something going through your ears, particularly with regard to the pictures in the film, obviously.
Yes, very strange. I think one of the reasons when we looked at the sort of early footage, we thought about how a hearing audience might relate and if it was just me and my face and using sign language, and how a hearing audience would feel about that, because they're not used to watching somebody using no language and no voice. So we wanted to do some recording of my voice for some parts, and I couldn't quite believe that because I don't use my voice. I've got a very deaf voice, it's not very clear. So that was an interesting thing for me to do as a deaf mute character. I wasn't sure how that would work. So I guess that is my inner voice, really. I just used creative license to sort of help. It was really, the aim of using that was to help the hearing audience to engage with the sound of the film, but it was a very strange thing to do. And my throat was really dry, I was drinking loads of water, I'm not used to talking. It was a really strange experience, and it's very strange to watch it. But I hope that helps sort of the hearing audience.
Because when you were recording it, you were wearing a Ramones t-shirt and you had hearing aids in. I was just wondering, what do the Ramones sound like to you?
I do love music. I obviously don't get the same. I hear the rhythm, I can hear certain instruments, the guitar, but the Ramones is a band I love. The original idea for part of the film was to see me as Samuel Dorr coming into being James Duffy as well. So they filmed me originally having this horrible, horrible haircut, which I absolutely hated. I had to change my clothes and kind of get to grips with the bicycle. So we filmed all of these different things, Sam becoming James Duffy, but they all got sort of edited out. But you saw that throughout the film as well, the crossover. But they're a great band.
Thank you. So Matt, how are you as a filmmaker talking to our brain without going through our ears?
As a filmmaker, I suppose what I try and do is tell stories visually and with sound rather than too much talking. So I'm interested in what happens, but beyond words and where words don't work. And I suppose that may have drawn me initially to an interest in sign language. I just thought I'd explain a little bit of the sort of, because filmmaking's so kind of it's like a solution to a lot of difficult problems often. And that situation, Bobby, who says the line, "Jesus can talk to your brain without going through your ears," that's something that's come from him. We've not scripted him. I knew there was no way. He's the father of the head teacher you see in the school, Eunice. And having met him, I knew there was no way he was not going to be in this film. And there's no way I could keep him out of the film. So we thought, what can we do to give him a really clear role? And he was, he'd talk a lot about the fishermen's ministries, and he knew a lot about the history of Presbyterianism in Scotland and fishing culture. And I said, well, could you play a preacher? He said, "Are you sure?" And then he wrote 4 pages of sermon, which took up 3 hours of a shoot. Anyways. And poor Ian, the DOP, was just kind of, his ears were bleeding, But he came up with that line in improvisation with Sam. So Sam was sitting in the church there, in the chapel, and Bobby hadn't fully realised that Sam was actually deaf. So he was acting a role of someone talking to a deaf person. So he was saying all these kind of politically incorrect things, essentially. Like, don't worry, when you get to heaven, Jesus will give you hearing and you'll be fixed, and you'll be able to hear what I say. And that's where the line came from, but because, I work in that semi-documentary way, that was like a really great line to be delivered from him, and we incorporated it. Does that answer?
So that's yes. So we're going to throw it out there into the audience. Does anybody have any questions for either Matt or Sam or both?
Was it true that the bit about the girl tying
Is the mic coming your way? There you go.
Was it true that the bit about tying the thing on the back of the bike at the beginning, or was that just music?
Yeah, thank you for that question, because I was just seeing it and I was thinking about how that came about. One of the things I tried to get across was that it would have been difficult for James Duthie to be deaf in that community at that period. In the early 50s in a remote part of Scotland, he may have had one or two deaf friends, but he would have been pretty isolated. The name Dummy isn't obviously entirely kind. There's a whole thing we could talk about there, but what I wanted to get into the film was that he would have been under pressure and teased and probably bullied in some ways, and that was, I thought, a way of doing it that was without having a little scene with people standing in a circle going dummy, dummy, dummy. You know, how can you get this stuff across visually and with humour as well? And I like the idea of, well, it's a bit like the wedding car with the fish behind it or something. So it's a kind of a send-off, but a little needling send-off, which I think is quite typical of the humour there. So that's how it... So it's not true in that it happened, but it's hopefully true in some poetic way.
And it also makes it clear that the audience is experiencing something that James Duthie's not the whole way for the rest of the journey as well. The sound is, with a certain degree of irony, so important in this film as well. What was some of the direction that you had for sound for the one ensemble?
Well, the one ensemble who did the main score, they had access to the original journal, and then I gave them a list of the proverbs, and that's all they had, and that's all they asked for. And I started at one point reading a version of the screenplay, and Daniel, the main composer, just said, "Could you stop? It's just all these words and it doesn't mean anything." So they made their own interpretation, and the soundtrack precedes the film by 3 years, so I had a long time to really, get used to the music.
Because from the sounds of it, they weren't going to change it.
No, well, it was a standalone commission, and we toured with the music and footage from the film that we had at that point, and projections of text, and it was a sort of reiteration of what became, or pre-iteration, if that's the word, of what became the film. And in terms of the sound, that's something I've always been really, really interested in, is sound. For me, it's definitely more than 50% of the whole cinema picture. And so I had quite a strong say in some of those edit decisions about sound, and we were lucky enough to work with someone at Technicolor, so we had a couple of days to do some work with surround sound, which really helped us. And we wanted to make it very physical and visceral, so you have this bass sound of like the tyres on the ground, and make it really clear that when there's an accident or with his bicycle, that you cut out of a certain view into his view, and you're very with him then at that point.
There's one question over there.
Did you get to meet any of James's family that helped to prepare for the film and help with his character? If so, who and what were they like, and how did they help?
Yes, very fortunately we did. Quite early on in the production, I got to know his first and second cousins, so Elsie and Joy. Elsie died about a year after meeting her. Joy died about 3 years ago.
Sorry.
Oh. And yeah, okay. And they were really helpful. Joy in particular, and then Joy's daughter. So Dummy and Jim's second cousin was removed. Lorraine has been brilliant. All of them really supportive, and they helped us understand a bit about how he was communicating. Because I don't know if it's clear, but he was killed in a road accident in '65, so we didn't get to meet him. But they would explain that he used finger spelling, written notes, some gestures, but he wasn't really a big signer, which is why you don't see very much sign language in the film. And then actually once we had met them, the interest in the character started building in the community, and people would stop us in the street and say, "Oh, I knew the dummy and he did this or that," and we started getting stories brought to us rather than having to dig too hard for them. And then of course by the end, when the films come out, there's all these people, there's suddenly 1,000 people who are all cousins of Dummy Jim, so he's become something of a little local hero in the best sense of it, which is unusual because it's not a community that where anyone stands up and makes themselves special in any way. So
maybe ask a question.
the children receive much direction, or were they just told to be all sort of natural throughout the film?
Well, what you're seeing there actually is when I met the head teacher and said I would like to work with the school when it started, I said, we've got this scene where Dummy Jim comes back into the village, we want a crowd scene with the kids, and could we work with the school? And she said, after some discussion, that was agreed upon, but part of getting to that agreement was I made it really clear to her that I wanted to work around what they would ordinarily do, and then work around that and slightly tweak it or adapt it. And so she said, oh, well, we've got a coffee morning coming up in June. We do it as a fundraiser for the school. Would that help? And I said, sounds great. What, so everyone's in the same space? Brilliant. Could we maybe have them wearing the fisherman's jumpers? And then it grew from that. So what you're seeing is actually them being themselves, but slightly dressed up. And sort of taking part in they understand that it's for a film about this guy from their community, and they understand that it's also a fundraiser for the school. So it's this combination of sort of practical and creative, and it was an amazing day. And we had Nick you don't see it in the film, but Nick has a stall there, so he's doing ink drawings with the kids. There's Jenny the knitter is there, so there's characters from the film are doing their stuff. We didn't have anyone doing granite carving in the background, but the RNLI were there raising money, biscuits being made, cakes, all of that. So,
when you were making the film, how did you and Sam communicate?
I used to go back down to England and write second-class letters and send them to him. Thought the time delay helped with the actor-director relationship. There was mixture of working with Joe and Julie, who's also here, and then sometimes I would ask the interpreters to go away, because in practice, as it turns out, working with a deaf actor, so if I'm working to give some direction here, Sam's actually looking at Joe to understand what I'm saying. And it's so much about eye contact. So we did a mixture of things where Sam very, Sam, thank you for not insisting upon having an interpreter all the time, because it meant we had a different way of working. But it probably makes Sam a bit more vulnerable, but maybe he can talk about that.
Yeah, Matt's method of directing. We didn't have a script. There was no script at all. We just had sort of outlines of scenes. So in the morning before we started filming, Matt would say, okay, what we want to do for this scene is this, this and that. And then sometimes we'd leave me with Ian Dodds, the wonderful filmer, and we were sometimes left on our own. Even Matt would just let us both get on with it. And it was kind of having to improvise, and that's my worst thing, because I don't have a script. It's just a scene. We just had to get on with it. So I really had to push myself to kind of get really immersed in the character of James Duffy. So there was no very exact direction or script to follow. It was just get on with it and see what you can do. But I'm not a trained actor, so it's quite difficult for me. I just had to really kind of close my eyes and jump into it. And a lot of the time working with Ian, we would repeat shots, and Matt was there to say, yep, that was good. We were there for 2 full weeks in Scotland, and it was up and down, our relationship. Sometimes I loved him, and other times I wanted to strangle him. But at the end, I think we have a kind of similar way of thinking. We've got a similar sense of humour. We, have kind of an unusual take on life, I would say. And so, if we were very opposite people, it wouldn't have worked. But we've developed a very good friendship and relationship within the last 13 years working on this. And I think that made a difference.
You spent a lot of time in the saddle. I'm wondering what the sign language for chafing is. course.
But that bicycle, I built up a real relationship with that bicycle as well. It was an original 1950s bicycle, and I don't know if you saw my face when it started to rain. I looked very grumpy. I was really pissed off. I think that was the second or third day of filming where the bike kept breaking and it was continually raining. And Matt was sitting in a nice warm van and the rest of the crew, and I was out there pulling up my wet soggy socks and these horrible shorts and this awful 1950s clothing and this big plastic raincoat. I suffered, but it looks good, and the bicycle really did break. When Ian was filming and it kept breaking, I had to carry on acting. There was no stop and let's fix the bike. It was carry on and deal with it. How would James Duffy have dealt with it? Because this might have happened. He would have had to tie it up with string or whatever. So I built up quite a relationship with that bike over 2 weeks. But it was a bit of a diva, the bike, actually.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions out there in the audience? Right up there in the back.
Did you commission the gravestone, or was it being made anyway?
That came about actually from discussion with Joy and Lorraine about rights to the book, and traditionally there has to be some sort of exchange of money for rights, even if it's just £1, a sort of symbolic amount. And we probably could have found a significant sum for them for the rights if we'd had to, but they weren't interested in money, so they said, they thought about it for a bit, so could we make a headstone for him? Because he was in an unmarked grave, so we said, yeah, of course. Then, of course, my mind started whirling away. And I thought, well, maybe I can get the title of the book on there, maybe I can this and that. So I sort of collaborated with them and the Masons to get the right wording. And that's how it came about. But then I thought, if someone's going to spend 5 or 6 days making this thing, let's film it.
And the theme of craft and the making of things seems to be very important in the film. Can you tell us a little bit about why you made that so clear?
Well, there's a number of things happening. One is Aberdeenshire's, it is the world of granite. So I wanted to find a few to represent that quite strongly and visually and quickly. So that seemed like a natural thing to really incorporate as a thread. The knitting as well is a whole other cultural element, particularly strong in fishing communities. And literally another thread running through, like that sort of thing about the progression, and like I said earlier, trying to find narrative flows that are not narration as such. James Duffy was a trainee cobbler. A lot of deaf people in the early 50s would have been their sort of route into work, would have been through trades. So there's this connection between deafness and the sort of physical world of work. And I think just on a personal level, I'm really interested to see what happens to stuff when it gets made in close up, and the sounds and the details, and I'm not sure where that's from. That's just more a personal taste, I suppose.
Do we have any more questions? The gentleman here in the hat.
Hi, and how long did the film take to make in total?
Well, the whole process started in 2000. As Sam mentioned earlier, the main part of the shoot was for 2 weeks. All the stuff you see with the Super 8, these kind of panels that go across, they were shot over a 10-year period in 10 2-week sections, 10-day to 2-week sections. I've been thinking about it for 13 years. So's Nick, and quite a few other people. So I don't know the exact answer, but it feels like 13 years. But actually, if you added up the days, it's probably a couple of months or something. Maybe more with the editing. Probably 6 months or something. But yeah, that wasn't its birth. It just took a lot longer.
Do we have any more questions? The gentleman over here. You, sir, with the beard.
Hey, Matt.
Is that Ross?
Yeah, it is me.
Hi, how are you doing?
I just wanted to ask a question to prove I've actually come.
Oh, cool. From my oldest friends here.
Can you tell us anything about James Duffy's life after the events described in that film? I think by my maths it would be about 14 years between that and his death.
Yeah, as far as I know, he was carrying on with his apprenticeship in cobbling. Something that's revealed in the obituary is that he went on a really big road trip on a motor scooter that took him to something like 16 different countries. And some of the, I don't know if you spotted, there's footage actually of his in our film, and a few shots of him, and that was shot during those motor scooter trips, and his road accident was actually when he was on a motor scooter, not a bicycle. But beyond that, I don't know much about him, to be honest. I mean, when people talk about him, it's as if he was sort of a fairly consistent character, man of habit, and so, quite a big change would have been going from a bicycle to a motor scooter and travelling further afield. And I imagine a lot of his experience we won't know about because it was happening abroad. And if he didn't write it down, then or film it, then it's not lost. It's just not recorded.
As you mentioned, you've got all of the members of David Devon and his spirit wife in the audience here, and I was going to make reference to that, but I'm not even going to try. Sorry, I've been working on that all evening. Do we have any more questions for Matt or Sam? I think, is that Mikey at the back?
I don't know if it was just me, but how much of a deliberate cue was the drone at the beginning? Because it seemed to chime with the idea of repetition and craft and that humility of not even trying, just allowing the time to produce the art or the thing.
Well, I mean, it's deliberate in as much as I ask you to do a drone because I know there's a drone in the film. So then the audience hopefully will connect with the film in a different way. I hadn't really thought of the drone as you've described it there, but that's a good description of why I'm drawn to it.
I think you're also clearly trying to put us as an audience in a different space, and once you've done that, you've adjusted our expectations of what's about to happen, and I think that's very appropriate for that kind of film, because you need to, don't you? You need to adjust what you would regularly expect from a film, I think.
I guess so. I mean, in my mind, that's a sort of fairly normal film, but that probably tells you quite a lot about me. I was trying to make a normal film, I promised.
Do we have any more questions?
Seeing as it took such a long time to make a film, and because you talked about several bits of the narrative sort of being picked up while you were making the film, how different is the final piece to what you first envisaged, or did you actually envisage anything when you first started?
Yeah, I did envisage something, and I did a kind of slightly lazy way of describing it. It was something, I think it was between Man Bites Dog and Monsieur Hulot's Holiday. So essentially you're with a character and things happen and sound and image get split apart, but you're following a character around and he has encounters, which is sort of roughly what happens. But with the Monsieur Hulot's European, eccentric, slightly whimsical aspect, I guess. So it's fairly close to it. I mean, it's important to say that there was a period of a couple of years where we had some support to write screenplays, and I'd not written a screenplay, so that was me learning a new craft, and that inevitably pushed it in a more conventional way, and there's a lot more dialogue happening, a lot more people, characters, and yeah, it wasn't deemed to be fundable in that form, so we had to find a whole other way of making it. But some of that's sort of stuck with the final film as well. So.
It's a fantastic pitch that Lambites talk about. I'm sold on that. Sam, am I right in thinking that you make films yourself as a director? Can you give me an idea of what you learned about the process of filmmaking from Matt?
I think the films that I make are perhaps a little bit more conventional. I make short films. I think when we were working together, when Matt and I were working together, I was finding myself questioning his camera angles, his ideas, his thoughts. I had to really keep trying to remind myself that I was acting and not directing, and I kept saying, well, what about doing it this way, and having to stop myself. So it was interesting for me. It's kind of hard to explain. It's a difficult thing to answer. It really opened my eyes, I think, to a different way of filmmaking. But at the same time, it made me think acting's really hard. It's not easy. I didn't have acting training. It wasn't an easy thing for me to do. And I was really happy when we were finished, because then I could go back to making normal films.
But Sam, what's interesting is I really don't like people acting, which is probably why I was walking off set all the time, just because I couldn't bear to see it. And as you'll notice, we've cut all the acting out. So maybe that's why it was hard. But I've learned a lot from Sam over the years. Sam continues to make short films, beautiful photographs as well. But some of his early work really addresses the perception of sign language and the place of language in screen space. And I've probably, basically ripped off some of his ideas in one way or another. So Sam's a celebrity in the deaf community. Let's not forget this.
Do we have any more questions for that? You, sir.
Hi. Do you have any more plans for making any more films?
Is that for both of us? Or?
For both of you.
Yes, more plans for making more films, both of you. Together, possibly.
Well, we've had a working relationship now for 13 years, so I don't see why not.
I think it'd be interesting to reverse the roles and for me to have to go through experiencing what it's like trying to act with a director actually knows what he's doing. But did you mean in terms of our future projects? Or?
Yeah.
There's a project I'm trying to get off the ground at the moment, which is based on the story of a band I was in with my brother and sister. We're a punk band called the Hippies. We're all pre-teen, and that's kind of underway. And hopefully tomorrow I'm going to have an interview with Pelirocco Platters, which I think is on Radio Reverb. Is it Radio Reverb?
Yes, I think so.
Which is a kind of post-punk show. So I'll be talking about that. And I went to a documentary festival in Copenhagen to pitch the idea, which was a bit like Dragon's Den situation. So I was kind of khaki my pants, but actually it came off okay, and people seemed to like the basic idea of this teen band. But the most interesting thing that's happened is my brother's put his hand up and said, "I don't want anything to do with this. We've got a story."
Conflict. Yeah. And Sam?
Well, the problem is I'm a freelance filmmaker, and a deaf freelance filmmaker, a deaf graphic designer as well, and a photographer, and a deaf photographer. And why I say that is I have a range of skills, but in the freelance world it's very hard. and you know, with the skills I have, I can do a range of work, but I'm always looking for the next project, and I never know what it is. You know, I'm doing some cartoons at the moment, but the next day I might be working for an Irish television programme. I'm doing some directing, so it's kind of nice because I never quite know what's happening, but at the same time there's always that what's happening next as well.
You clearly love acting. Maybe some more acting.
I've maybe not said this. I think you're really good in this film, and so do many people who say it. So you should be proud of your performance.